On this episode of Industry Relations, Rob and I discuss and review the big why, the key issue, and the consequences of the upcoming commission lawsuits. Let's go. This is Industry Relations, a podcast that's at the intersection of real estate and technology from an insider's perspective, with Rob Hahn and Greg Robertson.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of Industry Relations with Rob and Greg. This is your co-host, the notorious Rob Hahn. And as always, with me is the fabulous Greg Robertson, Lord of Jazz Hands.
Hola, Rob. How's it going, man?
How are you? You know, I wonder sometimes if I've done you a favor or real disservice with like the fabulous Greg Robertson, the Jazz Hands. Like you must be getting it now, like everywhere you go. You know?
No, I told you the last episode. We were organizing. John Warner and I were organizing a meeting with one of these execs, and when he responded, he did the jazz. He put the jazz hands emojis and put that in parens. And we thought that was funny as well.
All right. So, lots to talk about, but I think, in the pre-show we were just chatting, there's been so much kind of reaction to our last podcast.
Yeah, I mean, most of it being I was right, I think, is what I was really getting. At least that was my Twitter feed was more slanting towards people agreeing with me.
All the people who are wrong tending to agree with you, I think, makes me very comfortable. But there's certainly enough to kind of take a look at that. It's earnings season, but I think we're probably going to wait until all of the reports are out and maybe just do a big wrap up, since we're not like a Wall Street show. You know what I mean? We're not that's not what we do. So we could talk about like the new Open Door Zillow thing. We could, and then we'll see what
Spy Balloon, Chat GPT. I mean, there's a few on my list here.
Yeah, exactly. But having said that, it does feel like, because it is so important to at least our audience, the sort of the lawsuits, the what's going on. So you had some ideas around how we might talk about that. So I'll hand over the floor to the fabulous one, Lord of Jazz.
I think, seeing the Twitter feeds and getting a couple emails, I think, and we spent a lot of time on this last year talking about the consequences of these lawsuits and what they mean. Right. One going to class action and, things like that. But it's been a while. There's also been some updates, and we've talked about these updates, like with disclosures more being made, NAR following some of the things there. Up in Northwest MLS, I think I talked about this last episode where, agents have to disclose to their sellers, that they're going to be paying for the buyer's agent's compensation, and what do they want to do that? And the sources that I'm hearing are telling me that, it's not changed much. I mean, they're still going, they still want, at least the seller's like agreeing that they should be compensated, and it's not going off much of what that normal quote unquote compensation is. So with all these kind of different things here, I thought, you've been following these cases, for quite a while. I think we should go back and just summarize what these cases are about and what they mean. And because in my assertion here, reading some of the tea leaves is, beyond the class action stuff, right? But going forward, how much is a threat? Is there a threat to buyer's agent's compensation? So that's kind of what I was thinking of.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's probably a good idea, because, it's a complicated, case, it's a complicated set of things. And, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, doubt. I guess one could argue that you and I are somewhat responsible for the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But all we're trying to do is kind of, help people understand exactly what's going on. So let me preface by saying, I am a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. This is just two fools on the internet talking. If you need actual legal analysis, actual legal advice, please contact your attorney, yada, yada, yada. Okay, cool. All right. So this is just edutainment going on here. All right. Having said that, let's start from kind of, I guess, what I'll call the big why, right? The big why of this lawsuit, the big why of all of these things that are happening. The big why fundamentally is that our ruling class believes that Americans pay too much for real estate services. Period, end story. By ruling class, I mean sort of the think tanks, the academics, the policymakers, the media, right? The people from the Cato Institute all the way to, whatever, Harvard, School of Real Estate. Like, those people all think Americans paying 6%, and now the national average is 5%. They're just paying too much compared to rest of the developed world. So that's the big why. The big why is, why are we paying 5%? Why are we paying 6% when, Europeans are paying 2%, Australians are paying 1.5%? Like, that's the big why, right? So start from that premise. And I'm saying I think that's important because when you think about what is the impact, what is this, that, and the other thing, ultimately, if we don't get real estate commissions to 5%, to 2%, right, then those policymakers, those academics, those people will not be happy. Their goal is to get commissions to 1.5% to 2%. Question is, can they actually do that? Right? All right. So with that background, what is the actual lawsuit, I suppose? What's really going on, right? Fundamentally, I think what it is there's the claim from the plaintiffs, right? And Merle is the first that really filed this, and they're the ones who really went forward with it, and then everything sort of stemmed from that. The claim essentially is that NAR and these big brokerages, the corporate defendants, have conspired to keep commissions high. And the way they've conspired, this is the claim now, the way they have conspired is through these various rules that collectively they're calling, I think it's like the cooperation rule. I can't remember, the commission rule or something like that.
Cooperation compensation.
Or something, I think they were called the commission rule. But one of the issues is not just one rule, right? They sort of go through the various code of ethics provisions. They go through the MLS handbook. They go through various parts and they pick out all these different rules. And they're saying collectively what this does is it keeps commissions high, right? After that was sort of filed, all these other things have sort of come into the play. So, for example, clear cooperation policy came into play because, PLS versus NAR, and then Department of Justice sort of intervened in that. Rex versus Zillow, around the whole non-commingling rule, and that's supposed to have some sort of implication around keeping commissions high. But fundamentally, the idea is by forcing sellers to pay the buyer's commission, the buyer agent's commission, right? This is keeping the seller commission really high, right? And the idea is you force sellers to do that through these various rules, and the MLS is kind of the mechanism that enforces it. It's keeping commissions at like the 6% level versus 2% level. I mean, that's the claim, right? So what's at stake? Well, if the plaintiffs are successful, number one, there's like potentially hundreds of billions of dollars in damages, which no one can withstand, so everyone will go bankrupt. The bigger, I think, concern really for the industry is, in theory, cooperation compensation could go away, and buyers will be forced to pay their own agents, sellers will be forced to pay their own agents, right? I mean, that's the fear, right? That's the big consequence of something like this. So let me stop there. What do you think? I mean, do you want anything to add? Anything?
Yeah. So I guess, and again, I don't know, it's because, we've got Stockholm syndrome or something, right? Where, we've been in this organized real estate thing for so long, it just seems normal. And it's hard for us to kind of step outside of this and look back from another perspective, from, as you say, the ruling class's perspective. I would say this, I mean, let's not talk about whether 6% or that is right or wrong or anything else. I can see that the reasons that it's been so hard to change, right? And I don't think this is by design. I just think this is the market, is that number one is the number of transactions really is relatively small, right? 5.5 million homes sold a year. if you want a competitive market, then you can go back to the arguments of like hotel, rooms and airline tickets and, things that are transaction, that there's a lot of transactions for. That's the first thing why I think this has been pretty steady. It's gone down, like you say, 6 to 5. And the other thing is basically what, the fight feeds into that is the frequency. People, it's a headache for them once every 7 years. Once they're done with it, it's like they want to forget it. They're in their house and they go on. So I think those two big factors are the ones that we haven't really seen a really, really push for any competitive, push down as far as these rates are concerned. Again, not saying whether 6% is high, if it's too low or whatnot, but I think that's a bigger reason. Now, I think that is probably the biggest reason why you haven't seen a downward pressure on these commissions, rather than, as some of this stuff is putting out there, that there's this cabal, right? I think that if these transactions were, a lot more, if it was more than 5.5 million a year, and if they happen in a lot more frequent basis, I think the market would adjust to that, and you would see that, right? Now you can make the argument.
Wait, hold on. Why would you see that? So let's say it was 12 million homes sold a year.
Well, okay, but I think anytime you're going to have, maybe the frequency is more than the total amount, right? Because, if you're doing something, if you're only doing it once every 9 years, right, once every 7 years, it's hard to.
That's what I'm saying. So let's say every person in America is going to buy and sell a home every year,
right?
Under the current system. Why would that drive prices lower?
If it was every year?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's just like to me, it's like, God damn, I just paid this last year. The feeling in the head is, right, I know. I just paid this. I just paid this. Where 7 years later, it's your memory of that, your kind of the pain point. Yeah. You don't really care that much. I mean,
sure.
Brian Barrero spoke at I think the last MN conference, and they were doing a lot of consumer based interviews and research, and lo and behold, the consumers that they interviewed, the buyers and sellers, they didn't really care about the commission. They wanted to be heard more. They wanted more of a communication from their agents, right? Which I thought was kind of surprising, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then you always get those stats, and we say this all the time in the vendor community. 90% of people that were interviewed said they use their agents, but only 11% do. I think that's more of a churn issue than anything else. Mm-hmm. We talked about the issue of, I think last year, since they've been recording it, is the biggest year percentage wise that people have used realtors ever. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's increasing, it's not decreasing.
Right? No, that's cool. I'm just saying, let's go back to what you said. It's just, if consumers did this more frequently, and we have more transactions every year, because you're right. It's, whatever, 6 million.
I think they're both linked there, of course, right?
Granted, it's linked. I'm saying, so let's say that changed. Why would that make commissions lower? What's the mechanics of that?
Yeah, I think the more frequently you do it, right, mm-hmm. and the more transactions that happen, that just makes a more dynamic market. And not,
I would let's get specific about it. So because I sell a home every year, right, and buy a home every year. When the next time I sell my home, I go to the agent and say, "Hey, man, I'm not paying 6%."
Right. So let's look at it this way. I mean, if you're buying, I mean, there's a thing I think that we both agree can be a quantity discount. Have you ever heard that term before?
Of course.
Right. Of course. Yeah. So I think in some manner, when you're doing some transactions in a frequent basis, a more frequent basis and more of those transactions, you're going to look for something a bit better than the rack rate or the standard rate. So I think that's
but that's what I don't think
that's a very really weird.
But that's exactly what I'm getting at, right?
Okay.
So you're like, I want a discount, or I buy so frequently, right? And the agent says, absolutely, I'm happy to charge you 1%.
And yeah,
right.
And here, let me even be more specific on that. What that would also do is it would drive innovation more, right? Because then if you're increasing the number of frequencies and people are buying that, then I think the stuff that we complain about in real estate as far as, oh God, the transaction's so hard and so this and that. Well, if you've got to, like, now you're doing it once a year and there's, triple, double the number of transactions, the market's going to react to that as well. They're going to,
no, I agree.
make things better.
I agree, but I'm just trying to distill down to what I think is that the real heart of this, right? So you do a transaction every year. There are 10 million homes sold every year. So the consumer says, this is bullshit. I'm not paying this, right? So somebody arises, some company says, hey, you know what? We can make money. We'll just do it at a discount, right? So they go to a consumer and say, hey, listen, I'm only going to charge.
There are companies like that now, right? I mean, we have several of those companies.
Yeah. But think about what the conversation is today, or would be, whatever, right? It's like, hey, man, I'm only going to charge you 1%. But if you don't offer 3% to the buyer agent, no one's going to show your home. Do you know what I mean? And that's the conversation. And that's at the heart of this lawsuit, right? Which is to say that, and the example they could pull out are guys like Redfin. I remember Redfin was doing the 1% listing fee.
Still do, right? I think, in a lot of places.
I think they moved away from it. But but the issue was, okay, I could go and pay Coldwell Banker 6% or 4% to Redfin. Like, yeah, it's less, but it's not that much less, right? And what Redfin agent will tell you is, listen, in fact, I'll do it for free. I'll list your home for free. There's a company, Hauser, right, back in the day. And I think they might still do this, where they'll say, it's free. Like, I'm not going to charge you any money to sell your house because I'm going to make it up on like buyer leads or whatever, right? But even they had to be like, but you got to at least pay 3% to the buyer agent. Otherwise, no one's going to show this home, right? And I'm saying this part's important because, hold on, let me finish.
Okay.
This part's important because one of the very first documents that the plaintiffs and Merle produced and sort of filed was that training manual from Keller Williams, right? And the training manual essentially was like how to overcome commission objections, right? So you have a listing appointment, you do this thing, and the sell's like, hey, you look great, I want to hire you, but man, 6%, that's an awful lot of money. And the manual would train agents to say, it's not me. Like I'm only charging you what I need to charge you because I'm going to do all this marketing, I'm going to do all this stuff. But if you don't offer the buyer agent money, no one's going to show your house. It's not going to sell. Like that was in the training manual. And then, when I wrote about this, I did that Tom Ferry video from 2014 or something like that, right? With what's his name, Randy Ora, right? And he's the one who's like, hey, you could offer 2.5% or 3% or 3.5%, and it's like, if you don't offer 3%, then this is what agents do, and all that, right? It's like that's at the heart of this. Right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, you can't. I mean, a couple bad apples and understandably a bad practice, right? I mean, you can't take a training manual from one company and make it a cabal. Right. I mean, it's just, it's a bit of an overreach on that kind of thing. These are practices that we should have never done. And again, let's move on and learn from that and do that. But I mean, as far as saying, because this training manual, I mean, and then again, how many damn realtors read a training manual? Is evidence of a giant conspiracy within the organized real estate is kind of ridiculous.
Okay, let me ask you. Suppose the plaintiffs in that case produce training manuals from every company and have videos from every real estate coach that says, here's how you overcome commission objections. Does that change things for you?
Suppose the defendants produced the Realtor Code of Ethics. Does that change everything?
No, the Realtor Code of Ethics is one of the things they're claiming is the heart of this conspiracy to keep prices high. All I'm pointing out is, look, Keller Williams, I'm not saying it's one, and I think the plaintiffs have already produced a whole bunch of docs and a whole bunch of stuff from people like Coldwell Banker, from Home Service America, from Dale Stinton at NAR.
I'm sure there's a ton of bad information out there, for sure.
Here's the thing. I think let's not get hung up on sort of what I consider to be unimportant, uncontested things. No one is contesting that there was a conspiracy, right? And now, when I say conspiracy, though, this is a term of art. This is like written into the law. It doesn't mean a like secret cabal, the way you want to put it, right? It just means that there was sort of a agreement, there was discussions, there was conversations happening, and that's just under the law. No one's contesting that. Like NAR no, I don't even Kelvin's named. NAR Anywhere Home Services. None of those guys are saying we didn't get together and discuss this issue. They're all agreeing we did. What they're saying is nothing that we discussed.
Hold on. They're saying all those things, guys. Those guys got together and decided together that they were gonna.
Yeah. So there's like a couple elements to antitrust law, right? You have to have a conspiracy, and it has to be blah blah blah. I'm just saying no one is contesting there was a quote conspiracy, right? Meaning a
no one is consenting there is one. Okay, all right.
They're saying, yeah, of course, we're a trade organization. We get together at events and we talk amongst ourselves. Like there's nothing weird about that, right? So they're not contesting that piece. What they're contesting is that the result of this conversation is anti-competitive, right? Whereas the plaintiffs are saying the result of that conversation, these rules and policy you put into place, is anti-competitive and keeps commissions high, right? And I'm bringing all of this up because at the very, very beginning, from like day one of this lawsuit, I remember saying, and I remember writing, ultimately, this case is about steering. Ultimately, right? Because there's all this academic research. There's National Bureau of Economic Research. There's MIT economists. There's all this research that seems to suggest that prices are kept high because buyer agents will not show homes, will not sell homes that don't offer enough in cooperative compensation.
Yeah, see, I remember these conversations. I mean, I totally disagree with that. I mean, It is so hard in this area of IDX and listings everywhere. I just if it's a 4-bedroom house with 4 bathrooms and it's 2,700 square feet in this zip code, and that's exactly what the seller or the buyer's looking for an agent to discourage that person from seeing that house is, I mean, the buyer's just going to get another agent or schedule them or schedule themselves in some way, right? So now what I will give you though on the steering side would be, because I totally disagree with the steering on that angle, is what you mentioned before, and maybe this is a peak with the Northwest MLS thing, is that there could be some steering in saying where the seller's agent could say, well, we have to fill in this buyer's, compensation thing, buyer's agent compensation. And if the seller asks, well, what do you think I should put on here? It says, well, I would put the full amount because you want people to show it. And again, I'm not 100% sure whether that's a great outcome here.
Okay.
Right. Because I think, I think we did some like role playing last time of what, if you're the seller's agent, what do you say to them? I can't say any, I can't, I can't do anything here. You just, I'll turn away and you put the number down. Right. I mean, what advice are they going to give them? And is that advice, is it good advice? Right. Because if they say, well, if the seller says, I'm only going to give $500.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, is that a kind of a fuck around and find out situation? Right. So yeah, put $500 down and let's see what happens.
But as a listing agent, are you doing your fiduciary duty to your client, telling them to put in $500 when you know for a fact that it means it's going to get fewer showings?
But I don't know. Again, and that goes back to my original statement to you. I don't know if it really is going to really matter that much. Again, if this is a house that meets the criteria of what somebody's looking for, the buyer's going to find it and want to see it, right?
Okay.
I mean, if the agent wants to go through, well, I heard somebody died there, or there was a lot of rat problems in the neighborhood. If they're going to make shit up, I mean, that's an ethical thing, and that's something else, and that's something, maybe another conversation. But in this day and age,
it's not an ethical thing. Let's say the agent's acting ethically, but the fact of the matter is that agent is not going to get paid, right? It's not unethical to say, hey, listen, that house, it looks great for you. Maybe you should go see it, but they're not paying me.
No.
I don't get paid if you buy that house. So
no. I mean, there's ways of solving that, right? The buyer's agent, could have had them fill out a form. So when
but you're adding on additional features like, if you have an exclusive buyer agency agreement, et cetera. So if you buy that home, you have to pay me because the seller's not paying me. I'm saying just leave that out for the time being, right?
Okay.
Because these are all novel, new things.
Yeah.
I'm just pointing out when the lawsuit was filed and the practice doesn't exist at the time, the issue was, and this is at the heart of it. That's why I'm saying it's still about steering, right? Now, and what I wrote then, what I still feel now is, as a result, this is going to be a fact-based decision. If buyer steering, in other words, buyer agents saying, "Hey, I'm not showing that house because it's only offering 2% instead of 3%." If that's 1 in 100,000 agents do that, right? In other words, most agents are like, okay, well, this is the house for you, then I will show it to you. I'm going to do what's right for you, and then we'll figure out how I get paid or don't get paid later. If that's 1 in 1 million, then, yeah, it's a few bad apples, if you will, right? But if that's 999,000 in a million, then it's a totally different story, right? So I
Right.
think what at trial, in my opinion, what the experts and the data and what they're going to try and say is, the plaintiffs are going to try and say this steering is widespread. This is very common, right? And then the defendants are going to say, no, the steering is just a once in a while bad apples, and the vast majority of realtors and vast majority of transactions will show every home that is right for the buyer without regard for whatever the compensation is. To me, I think that's going to be the heart of it. The lawyer's going to argue over all sorts of little things here and there, Ricky Dink, procedural, this, that, and the other thing, and whatever, Sherman Antitrust Part 2, and like, cool. Fundamentally, I think what those trials come down to is steering by buyer agents commonplace or is it rare? If it's rare, then I think defendants win. If it's commonplace, then I think the plaintiffs win.
Yeah, what this brings me back to is that Newsday story in Long Island, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just, we thought we were over with this kind of profiling stuff, right?
Right.
And then what you got from the excuses of those agents and the brokerages was they weren't even really aware of what they were really doing, right? It was just it was like, I don't want to say unconscious bias, but I mean, it was just, and this, maybe I'm talking out of both sides of their mouth. This is what they were trained to do, right? In these manuals, in these books and whatever else, they didn't really even regard to, the wrong or right or ethics of this, right? I would be worried if I'm NAR or something else, of like, not that these are unethical agents or, bad app, whatever. It's just that, there's just not been enough education to understand in these guys what is the right thing to do, right? And we'll know. I don't know what the statistical deviation is going to be, where the line is, where the tipping point is from saying statistically, yeah, motherfuckers, we got you, right? To whatever. But I mean, that's troubling for sure.
Yeah. So look, I don't even think we need to inject the sort of the racial steering, which is vile.
No. To me, it was just the
No, I get
reaction.
you. I totally get you. Since our goal with this particular podcast is just to kind of review things and explain like what's at stake, what the important issues are. That's always been my belief. I think these cases turn on steering, right? If steering is commonplace, then the plaintiffs win. If steering is rare, then I think defendants win.
Okay.
That's
all right. So I think that's great. So I think we talked about the why.
Yep.
And I'm with you on the steering on the, and then I think I'm with you on the steering.
Yeah.
In some sense, right? They're kind of linked.
Right.
Now let's talk about the consequences, right?
Sure.
Because does this mean, let's say if they win, does this mean that, that buyer's agent compensation goes away? What say
Unclear.
you?
So let's actually take that in two steps. One is the case that's going to come to trial first, which is the Burnett case, right, out of Missouri. It's exactly the same as the Merle case. It's just filed in Missouri. I don't know why they haven't consolidated those, but they have, right? What we don't know, what no one knows exactly is what the court will order, right? So let's just say the plaintiffs win, because that's what we're exploring, right? And the consequence, what's the consequence? It could be that the judge simply orders something like, the so-called mandatory nature of the rules, right? So, a lot of these rules like cooperation, compensation, these are mandatory from NAR, right? Maybe the judge says you just can't be mandatory. So these rules have to be optional, right? I mean, that it's possible. If that's the case, then there's probably no impact whatsoever, right? because
Is this
every
when
MLS
you
will be
say
like,
that? Would you say that's on both sides of the compensation, the seller side and the buyer side, or just the buy side?
just the buy side, right? Because they're
Okay.
not, no one is challenging what the seller's compensation is, right? In other words, if some listing agent says to a seller, hey, I'm going to sell your house, you're going to pay me 3%. No one's like, well, that's a problem, right? It's just that that 3% is connected to the 3% you have to pay the buyer agent. And then that allows me to, essentially strong arm you into keeping compensation at 6%. Like that's the claim effectively. So it's possible that the court order just says, hey, NAR, these rules, these commission rules, they have to be optional.
Right, but
That's
when
possible.
when I had Katie on,
Yeah.
you'd mentioned this last time. She had said that CRMLS was thinking that commission out of the mantra of MLSs was going away entirely.
Hmm.
Right. I mean, so that to me says that the
Maybe. I don't know
yeah,
about that.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe. I don't
Okay.
see that happening. But so that's possible. Do I think that's likely? I don't personally, right? And now this is the point where I have to reference back to how we began this, which is the ruling class and what they want out of this, right? What they want is they want commissions to be 2%, not 6, not 5. Okay, well the judge is like, if I'm going to make this order as, okay, I'm going to say the plaintiff's won, right? Or the jury says the plaintiff's won. I have to now make some sort of court order, right? If that court order doesn't get commissions 2%, then in a way, like, what have we changed? We haven't affected anything. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's much more likely the court order is something more like, not only is this stuff optional, you cannot have these rules. Any rule that talks about sharing commissions, right, is anti-competitive. Something along those lines, right?
Any rule that talks about sharing commissions.
Right, is
Well,
anti-competitive. That's
right.
possible. Now, here's the
Right.
thing. And as I pointed out all along, judges are somewhat limited in what they can do, right? If you think about it, really, what a judge is supposed to do is say, who wins and what's the penalty, right? It's not that the judges aren't really supposed to go in and craft policy, right? Judges aren't supposed to go and say, okay, NR, here's your new rule, right? Here's what the commission rule has to be going forward. Like, they're not really supposed to do that, right? Which is not to say judges haven't done that. They certainly have. You think about like some of the lawsuits around voting districts. There's
Right.
almost always lawsuits around like it's gerrymandering, right? In a lot of those cases, the judge will go in and draw the district himself, right? And there's some questions as to, well, who the hell are you to draw election districts? But that's neither here nor there. So it's possible that judges, in either the Burnett case, the Merle case, could go in and say, hey, I'm finding for the plaintiffs, and this is anti-competitive, and NAR and MLS, so here's your new rules. Right? Like, it's possible, right? And then all that happens then is like an appeal. Like, hey, the district court overstepped their boundaries. They don't have the authority to craft rules for a private trade organization, blah, blah, blah. So that's possible. But I think the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. I think the judge will probably go, yeah, plaintiffs win. And these rules that NAR has promulgated, that have put in place, is anti-competitive, right? You need to come up with some new rules that are not a problem. Right? I'm not going to write those rules for you. I'm just telling you need to write those rules. In the meantime, here's a $6 billion judgment against you. And that's the bigger deal, right? The bigger deal is Burnett. My estimate for the damages in Missouri is about $6 billion. Obviously, and I know, the entire world knows, everyone's bankrupt if they try to pay that, right? Like,
Right.
no one has that kind of money, which means it will get instantly appealed, right? Like, Burnett's going to happen, and the very next day, appeal to the is it the Eighth Circuit or whatever Court of Appeals, right? We know that, and stay the judgment, so it's not like NAR and anywhere has to write $6 billion checks. We know this. Everyone should know that. The problem, though, that's not the end of it. That doesn't mean you should relax. The reason is, the minute that case comes down and the plaintiffs win, we're going to see about 5,000 lawsuits pop up around the country. Right? And this is something I've written about as well. And so you're not out of the woods. Like, you need to really pay attention to this. And I think one of the things I've seen personally, like just a lot of the local MLS leadership, the local association leaders are just like, they're kind of, okay, yeah, we know this is happening, but NAR is taking care of it and we don't really need to worry or focus on it. And I'm like, because they're not named, right? Like all of the MLS execs we know, they talk about like, we're really worried, CRMLS, all these things, except in the lawsuit, no MLS is defended. All of the MLS are so-called co-conspirators, but they're not actually being sued, right? What I'm saying is if Burnett gets decided, they're all going to get sued, right?
Yeah.
Not by these big national law firms, but some local ambulance chase is going to come and sue the Central Susquehanna Valley Associate Realtors for your anti-competitive whatever, and you owe the 2,000 people in this town $17 million for the last 9 years. It's going to be that, right? And that alone, no matter what happens to those particular cases, will fucking wreck the industry.
Right? Yeah. So, okay, I get that larger sense here. Let's take it back a bit. Let's go back to the MLS level, right? So this gets, they say basically this way of commission, the commission structure that have you now, we have to blow up. Now, that really does take away the fundamental value proposition of MLS is like, hey, you help me sell my listings, I'll help you sell yours. We both get paid, right?
Yep.
So that's blown up, right?
That's right.
So now there's got to be a new, and that's basically been the carrot to getting brokers to cooperate on an MLS. Yep. Okay. So the fundamental thing there is that now the MLS has to create a new proposition. And this is, I guess, maybe where Katie was going to, where commissions is not just the carrot.
Right.
What other things can they provide?
Right.
This is really helpful, Rob. So what are other things? And this is why you're seeing, I think, some of the things that are playing out here now.
Right. That's exactly right.
What other things can we provide as an MLS that can serve as an incentives to keep this cooperation fostered and growing? Because we're not going to be able to count on this really great instrument, this MacGuffin, right?
That's right.
This one device to help people keep in line, right? And, and that's why I think you see we have to build better software for them. We have to have, a national presence. We have to share data with each other and everything else. So I think this really to me, I think will tie together for our listeners, like why we're seeing all this, right? It's because it's all shaped upon, hey, I'm an MLS and I used to count on this damn commission thing to keep people in line. I'm not going to be able to kind of keep people in line. What else can I do? Besides, I mean, we've talked about, the value of an MLS. I think, there's still a lot of, value in like keeping the data pure in one place as a source of truth. But, some brokers are going to be, not so much, right? We're the biggest one in here. If we left, we could do whatever we want. So they're going to have to come up with as many solutions as they can to keep everybody happy, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And you're exactly right. That's why I think we're seeing all these MLSs talking about data distribution plays, this play, we're going to do transaction management, we're going to do CRM, we're going to do all this, which like what people are trying to come up with is like all this package of goodies that'll keep their subscribers keep paying them subscription fees when the central value proposition is no longer in place.
So what do you think, what timeline are we talking about here? What we can tell our listeners, like, obviously prepping, as you say before, is a good thing, right? Like now that and I love, this is a great episode because I think this frames, everything, because I think since the last time we've been talking about it, we haven't seen the reactions of the MLS organizations out there. And now this is kind of tying everything together, right? So what do we think the timelines are for this? Because, I mean, we know that, for instance, the NAR DOJ thing is going to get appealed. Yeah. Obviously, all this shit is going to be appealed, right? I mean, so what's the timeline? I mean, this isn't the first one of these things. First of all, doesn't start until October, right? Because they delayed the one. What do you think?
I think December.
December is it's not going to be, but it's not going to be solved in December because they're going to appeal, right?
No. I don't even mean solved. What I'm expecting the next big thing to hit will be Burnett, the Missouri case, holds for the plaintiffs, and we see 5,000 lawsuits across the country. And I think that
after
ruling,
that's done.
right? And I think that ruling will probably come out in November, December.
Right. Well, that's pretty close to the October timeframe, right? So that's
because they've been talking about, they briefed, like they've argued everything. They just need to do a trial, do some fact finding, and by the way, it's a jury trial, right? So which is not great for NAR.
Well, is it or not? I mean, if we go back to what we talked about before, I mean, most consumers are using realtors and they're happy with them, right? So maybe that actually serves an NAR well.
I don't know, man. Like, if you went to anyone who's ever sold a home, is like, hey, so you overpaid, when you sold your house because you were paying the other guy's agent, and this cabal of big companies and NAR.
How they're going to frame it, you mean? Yeah,
that's how they're going to frame it. I mean, so then NAR has to go. All I'm saying is, when you were talking to just regular random ass consumers who serve on juries, they're not economists, right? They're not industry experts. There's no way that the plaintiff's attorney is going to let a realtor sit on that jury, right? Like, that's just not going to happen. So it's going to be a bunch of retirees, and it's way easier story to be like, look, NAR and Realogy and all these big companies, they screwed you. Versus, listen, this is a complicated situation scenario where blah blah blah, and none of this really affects anything. And like, good luck. I mean, so I think they're going to lose.
Okay, so hold on. You're saying first trial's in October. It gets settled sometime November, December, because you think it's going to go towards the plaintiff.
Yeah.
Then the next year there's going to be 1,000 flowers bloom of lawsuits, right?
Correct.
But that's going to be appealed, right? So
sure, it'll be appealed.
So that then you're going to start if you think there's 5,000 lawsuits filed, but I mean, through the appeal process and everything else, when does that thing, you think, finally die?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think the appellate process could take, say, 2 years, right? But let's say the Circuit Court of Appeals comes back and finds for either party. So let's say the Court of Appeals says, hey, defendant, you win. It turns out the trial court made all these errors, so there's no violation, right? Okay, well, the plaintiff is just going to appeal that to the Supreme Court, right?
Right.
So ultimately, I don't think this gets resolved until either one of the sides gives up, right? They're like, we're not going to appeal this, or the Supreme Court comes down and sort of makes a ruling, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, my guess
that's
is
7 years.
Yeah.
That's 7 years. Okay. Now, I don't think that's relaxation time. Here's why. Because you asked about timeline. I think after December, every local association, every local MLS has to up their legal budget. And I'm saying it's a big deal because, fine, you don't have to do we have to come up with a new value proposition, right? But man, if you're sitting there,
well, I mean, they're all paying for their E&O insurance, right? I mean, they're all part of NAR. So I think, they might launch a 5,000 lawsuits, but I mean, it's going to be easier for the plaintiffs to just, instead of managing that many lawsuits, I mean, they could just double down on, okay, I would still, I don't know if I'd file that many. There could be individuals, I guess you're saying.
That's right. This isn't the law firm finally. No, I'm saying it's some ambulance chaser in Central Ohio going after the local MLS, right? Because they just see dollar signs. I mean, I'm not these plaintiff's lawyer bar, man. Like that, those are some hard big motherfuckers. Time. Like, these aren't necessarily like kind and generous people. So I'm just saying the problems now becomes, CRMLS and Bright, they're big enough to be able to deal with that, right? When you're 1,000-person MLS in Central Ohio somewhere, are you going to be able to deal with, 2 or 3 ambulance chasing lawyers coming after you?
Well, you got to believe they're going to see some assistance from NAR, right? I mean, they're part of the National Association of Realtors, right?
You're exactly right. But NAR itself is spending all this money on legal fees, and now they're going to have to go and hire lawyers for 1,100 local associations.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? It's not going to happen. Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's why this is such
major, right.
That's why this lawsuits are a big, NAR and everybody else have to bring it strong now, right? Because they don't want to.
Exactly.
And let's be honest. I mean, these guys, I mean, I said that they're pretty gangster before, but I mean, NAR, I think is formidable. I mean, I wouldn't count these. You think that it's just going to go for the plaintiffs, but I mean, man, you've been surprised before. I've been surprised before.
You're right. So
we'll see what happens here, right?
Who knows? So but we're just talking through consequence. Obviously, if NAR wins, there's no consequence. You won, right? So
there's going to be there'll be an appeal there too, right? Of course, right?
Of course,
right.
But no matter what ends up happening, it's like, okay, that's what we can expect probably next year. What I'm saying is local MLS, local association, if you guys aren't having conversations today about what do we do if Burnett case goes for the plaintiffs, and we have to deal with copycat lawsuits in our jurisdiction. As far as I know, very few MLS and associates are having that conversation, right?
Right.
And here's the thing. Let's just even say cost is taken care of. NAR says, look, we have just hire attorneys and we'll pay for it. Okay, cool. You've hired attorneys. Your CEO and your board members still have to answer interrogatories, depositions, reply to all this legal paperwork. I mean, it's more than a distraction, right? I mean, you ask anybody who's actually been through a lawsuit, man, the process is the punishment.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm telling you, local MLS, local associates, I do not think are talking about this enough, right? So that's like, to me, you're talking about prepping. You need to be doing that shit right now about what are we going to do in March or April of next year if this happens, right?
Right.
And as far as I know, no one has that contingency plan in place. No one's even talking about it. The other problem, though, is, as I've talked about in a lot of my previous podcasts and posts and whatnot, that's only we're talking about these civilian lawsuits. We haven't yet talked about the Department of Justice, and we haven't talked about, more importantly, the FTC, right? And this is something I pointed out in previous episodes. The Biden executive order on competition contains a very specific provision telling the FTC to regulate real estate listings and brokerage, right? We know the FTC works hand in hand with the Department of Justice. That Department of Justice just got its face slapped by NAR in that recent lawsuit thing, okay? But that lawsuit that NAR won wasn't on the merits, right? In other words, the court didn't say no. NAR
thing. Yeah.
It was a contract that had to do with discovery motions, shit like that. It had to do with CID. Okay. DOJ still very much like, we're coming after you for this anti-competitive
right
shit.
But there's nothing active now. They've just have that order, but there's no case pending on the merits of all this right now, right?
Only because the Department of Justice withdrew the complaint.
Right.
So they could file the complaint tomorrow and you have an active case.
Right.
To me, what seems more likely,
go ahead, sorry.
It's not even that. Now the DOJ hands the baton over to the FTC and says, it's not about us suing NAR. It's about you regulating NAR. That to me is the bigger deal.
That's the threat in the woods right now, right? For sure. I think
that's
I don't know.
A closer threat.
I mean, I've been, reading, there's a few articles in the Wall Street Journal. It seems like the FTC is not doing well on the actions that they're doing. So they don't have a great track record, right?
Sure.
I think one of the chairpersons resigned recently. I forget who it was, but
Lena Khan?
No, not the chair, but maybe on the Congress Oversight Committee or somebody kind of resigned or something. So fed up with some of the things. Yeah.
Who knows? All I'm saying is the Department of Justice, these lawsuits, for the ultimate resolution is 7 years, right? Roughly speaking, because appeal, like we know that. That's not, so in the short term, the threats are short to near term. So call it within the next 2 years. What I'd be concerned about are the copycat lawsuits and the FTC.
Yeah.
Because FTC regulation, they could just come down and regulate. They could just say, hey, you know what? Real estate agents are no longer allowed to share commissions. They could just come down and regulate. Just say, here's the regulation. Sellers are no longer allowed to pay buyer agents. Right? Like, now what?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So nothing is out of the woods. And like I said, the DOJ, NAR thing, everyone's like, well, NAR would do X, Y, Z and whatever. And all the comments we had after our last podcast, I'm like, number one, you're wrong. But number two, it doesn't matter. Right? Because it's not about NAR winning some victory over the Department of Justice over a civil investigative demand. The issue now is the Department of Justice is going to turn to the FTC and be like, hey, you know what? Punish these motherfuckers.
Right. Yeah. Well,
by the way, yeah, I want to make this point. This is not new. FTC has been after NAR since the 50s.
Forever.
Since the 50s. So this is just the latest salvo. This is just the latest thing. We'll see what happens. I mean, there's a possibility. NAR is politically so powerful. They just go to Congress. They go to whatever. They go to the administration. Like, hey, stop the FTC from coming after us. And it might work. I'm not saying it won't work, but that's the play, right? It's not about lawsuits. It's not about all this stuff. That's the play.
Yeah.
So I can't believe we talked an hour about episodes and issues we covered in the past, but we did.
I like this. This really brings a thread to all the things we've been talking about. Yeah. And I think it's great that we have this conversation now post that there's been some actions done in the industry, and we can kind of like, well, why is this happening? And I think our listeners are going to like this. So yeah, great job, Rob. Fantastic.
Thank you, sir. Great job by you, Greg, for asking all the right questions. We still have to, at some point, talk about, that would be a really cool episode, right? What is the value of an MLS if there's no compensation?
Yeah, I think, I know we've talked, we always have arguments, side arguments about that on some of the episodes, but, or, I would put it more in a positive light, like what can an MLS do, in a post, the changing MLS value proposition, right? That type of thing, for sure.
You could put it positive, you could put it negatively. Fundamentally, how are you going to keep these agents paying you?
It's really the brokers, really, right? I mean, that's the juxt of it here, for sure.
How are you going to keep them paying you? Like, what are you going to offer them so they keep paying you if there's no compensation? Right?
Yeah,
that's good. So that should be a future episode.
There's no
somebody on
mandatory compensation, right? That's the key. Yeah.
Well, I think if it's not mandatory but it's still allowed, then we still have steering. So the only way to really have this conversation is either the court order or the FTC says you are no longer allowed to compensate.
That's crazy, though. I mean,
why is that crazy?
There's work to be done. I mean, it's just, you can't. I don't think
the
you
buyer
can
pay their own agents.
Well, that's a compensation.
Well, but it's not seller paying the buyer. It's not the listing agent paying.
Well, I mean, okay, you said. I mean, again, all that is non-mandatory, but there's still compensation being put out there, just not mandatory.
Fine. What I'm getting at is if we go to a world, right, in which the real estate commission is no longer allowed to pay the buyer agent. Now what?
Yeah.
Right. And then what's the MLS do in that world? That to me is the future episode. Right?
I just can't see, the government saying to me, you're not allowed to use a trusted individual you like and compensate them for their work done for you. I just can't see them doing that to me.
Really?
Yeah.
The government literally regulates what kind of tags have to be on your bedding.
Yeah. Okay.
The government literally told me
I can't believe
a pistol brace on my AR is now a felony.
Teed up a government fear-mongering story to you. So
why is it fear-mongering? The government lies to us. We know this. The government tells us all kinds of bullshit. We know this. The government literally told people in Ohio that water is safe to drink. I'm like, you start. How about you start with drinking from that river first? And then, it's, come on, man. Your trust in the government is...
I mean, they're forcing us to pay for oil with gold. I mean, cats are sleeping with dogs now. I mean, it's crazy.
Man, one day we need to have an episode around the ANCAP philosophy, anarchism for the win. Anyway.
I'm going to your, like I said, I don't got any guns. I'm coming to your house, man. Jen and I are packing up and we'll be in your bunker. Get some, make sure you got some.
Get ready. Like, talk about prepping. You should be buying real estate and property in Las Vegas, right? And then stashing away some water and food.
My spider hole.
Yeah, you need one because you live in fucking Southern California. Like, it's about to be Mad Max world,
All right, man.
All right, brother. always a pleasure. Oh, man. We're so ridiculous.